My son will be working the slides, so hopefully he's got me on the right side. What side am I on? Where are they? Over here? All right, cool. Daniel's on my left. Okay, so hey, it's good to see all of you guys. We are in I'm not seeing all of you, but I imagine all of you here all the time. I see, there's Mark's head. I see kids running around, people popping sodas, people staring at me with blank stares, people smiling at me, people nodding their heads. I see all of that. But we're in the Books of the Bible project. We're nearing the end of the Books of the Bible project for this year because we decided last year that we would attempt to preach on every single book of the Bible. It was going to take us 5 years. This is our second year. So we're ending in Hosea, and hopefully we'll make it out of the Old Testament next year. So every summer we do one book of the Bible a week until the end of the summer. Now we're in Daniel, and Daniel is one of the major prophets. And Daniel wouldn't necessarily be a major prophet if he didn't have a bunch of dreams, because there's just a lot of historical things that happen. But Daniel is a little different in the way we're going to study it than we studied Ezekiel or Jeremiah or Isaiah. Hey, there goes Mark again. Say hi to Mark. Or Isaiah or Psalms or Proverbs or Job or the Song of Solomon. We're gonna kind of take a little bit of what we did a year and a half ago and showcase that. So a year and a half ago, we went through the books of the Bible. I mean, not books, we went through Daniel, and we did the Daniel Project. That means that we did an entire audio book, basically, of the book of Daniel with music underneath it. There is a link in Facebook and on YouTube that you can go directly to the page where you can hear the whole book of Daniel. We did art. We wrote 3 songs, 2 that we sing on a regular basis here, and people really love, and they're kind of favorites of our church. And we did tons of art. So you're going to see in the slides as I go through, you're going to see art that was done during the Daniel Project that kind of helps illustrate ideas that we were trying to communicate. And also, Mark's going to come up here twice during the sermon, and he's going to sing the 2 songs. We're not going to have the slides up, so if you know him, you can sing along, or you can just enjoy his presentation of those. So let me get started, because I'm not going to do a lot. So you can switch slide, Elliot. I'm going to give you a quick overview. So the book of Daniel really picks up in 905 BC when Babylon, that kingdom that we keep talking about, takes Jerusalem, captures Jerusalem, and they take Daniel, probably when he's 15, and some of his friends, they take them into captivity. And so this is sort of the first exile. There are 3 exiles out of Jerusalem before Jerusalem is basically decimated, and this is the first one. And just if you don't remember, Daniel is a contemporary, meaning he is alive when Jeremiah is alive and when Ezekiel is alive. Daniel is one of the first to go into exile. He is a young ruler, and that's why he was taken. So let me give you the quick breakdown of the book. Chapters 1 to 6 are Daniel and his friends. Chapters 7 to 12 are Daniel's visions of the future. So the first half, if you grew up in the church, you know a lot about him. It's Daniel in the lion's den. It's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's Daniel not eating meat and wine from the king's table, but eating vegetables. I mean, maybe even one of those people are part of the movement of the Daniel diet, extreme vegetarianism. That's what it is. The Daniel fast. Yeah, there's lots of different kinds of things that go along with that. But here's the thing. I want to say the best way you're going to understand the book of Daniel is to really immerse yourself into the Daniel Project. And I will say, as I said earlier, that I think the book of Daniel, out of all the books we've covered this summer, is one that speaks very specifically to the things that you and I are struggling with as a community, and that the people of God are struggling with to figure out how to live in this world and in this time. I think God was preparing us by having us do such a comprehensive breakdown of this book. So, I'm just going to walk you through it really fast, and we'll just go chapter by chapter, and I'll kind of highlight some things. So, in chapter 1, the theme that is set is that Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of Babylon, takes Jerusalem, takes the people into captivity. And what happens there in chapter 1 is this struggle for Daniel and his friends to hold on to their identity. Okay? When you move from your homeland and you move into exile, what the culture of the exilers is going to do is try to assimilate you and make you not who you were. And so for Daniel and his people, his identity is deeply connected to God, the God of Israel. And so if you in chapter 1, verse 6, it says this: among those who were chosen were some from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azrael. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, he named Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azrael, Abednego. Now, the Jewish names that these men had were names about who God is and how God is faithful. The names that they were given were Babylonian gods and what those Babylonian gods did in violence most of the time. And so what the Babylonians were trying to do was strip away the Jewish people's identity, and so by doing that, they took their names and gave them Babylonian names and basically said, you're no longer Jewish, you're Babylonian. Daniel and his friends' struggle was to hold on to their identity in God and who God said they were. Your and my struggle in this world, in a time where God tells us through Peter that we are simply sojourners, exiles in this world, that we don't belong here, that we're sojourning through, that we're in the world but not of the world, we struggle to hold on to our own identity, our identity in Christ, and not the identity that the world keeps telling us. The book of Daniel, one of its major themes is what does it look like to hold on to identity? Now, Daniel didn't have a choice when it came to his name, but as he was a chosen person to work in the throne room and around the king, they were being trained and given food that they weren't really allowed to eat, wine and red meat and things that were not, quote unquote, kosher, not part of the law. And Daniel decides to stand up and say, hey, no, we don't want to eat that food. Let us eat raw vegetables and water, and we won't have wine and meat, and see what happens. And if we're more alert and better than the people, all the other captives, then let us keep this diet. And so they do, and it turns out okay for them. But this was a moment when Daniel said, okay, you can change your name, but you can't change the way we live our life. We're not going to do that. And so they chose a moment to stand up for their identity in God and to what they thought was right. And that is really, in a nutshell, who Daniel is. You see in the first chapter, this is the kind of man you're going to deal with as we walk through. A man who fights to hold on to his identity in God. Now, chapter 2 is an introduction really to Nebuchadnezzar and a dream he has. And Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Babylon. And the thing that's interesting about him is he has this dream, and he's kind of smart. He knows that if he asks his magicians, quote unquote, to tell him the dream, or not tell him, just give him the interpretation, and he gives them the dream, then they'll just make up any old interpretation. And he won't get the right one. So what he wants is for them to tell him his dream and his interpretation. And they're like, well, that's impossible. And then he's like, fine, well, you're no good to me, and I'm going to kill all of you. Well, that means Daniel and his friends were going to get killed. So Daniel, when they come to get Daniel and his friends, Daniel's like, wait, what's the problem here? And so Daniel says, well, wait a minute, give me a day. And so they give him a day, and Daniel goes to his friends, and they get on their hands and knees, and they pray that God will reveal the dream to them. And this is the second theme of Daniel. The people in exile have to be people of prayer. Over and over again, what you will find is Daniel praying for understanding. Prayer is the constant pattern that he lives by. And so Daniel gets on his hands and knees with his friends, and they ask God to reveal the dream, and he does reveal the dream, and he reveals the interpretation. Now, what the dream was this statue that had like a gold head, and then there was silver, and there's, I think there was clay and bronze and iron, and it's the statue. And it represents, as you'll find out, all the different kingdoms. But then all of a sudden a rock comes out of the mountain and smashes the idol. And so Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar the dream, and then he tells him the interpretation in Daniel 2:44. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. Daniel raises up into Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. His friends rise up. He prayed for understanding. These two chapters, chapter 1 and 2 in particular, but really 3 as we'll see too, but 1 and 2 give us the character of who Daniel is. He's going to be a man who sticks close to God and the commands of God, and he's going to be a man who prays for understanding in all things. That's going to be who he is. Now, here's the unique thing about Daniel, is that in Daniel chapter 3, he's not there. In fact, his friends show up, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and King Nebuchadnezzar hasn't figured it out yet. So he decides to build a statue of himself. And this is another theme that has nothing to do with Daniel that goes through the book of Daniel, and that is the pride of rulers being brought low. God's battle with rulers. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are told that they have to worship the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. And they say, no, we're not going to do that. And so Nebuchadnezzar says, fine, we're going to throw you into the fiery furnace. Mark is going to offer a song that he wrote based on that and make a few comments on his thoughts on the song. And I'm going to make sure he's turned off.
Yeah. So this song, In the Fire, starts from the point of view of Nebuchadnezzar. It starts from the point of view of the king. Because there's a moment in Daniel 3, it starts out saying there's a stranger in the fire. He sees this stranger in the fire shining like the flames, and he realizes what he's done. He realizes that he's throwing these people in against God's will. But then he doesn't really change. I mean, he acknowledges that God is powerful, but he does not take on God as his God, the Most High God. But he uses this phrase, "Oh, Most High God." So this song starts from the point of view of Nebuchadnezzar, but then it shifts to us and our experience of being in the fire and knowing that God is going to be with us in the fire. There's a stranger in the fire, shining brighter than the flames, and I know he wasn't there before. Well, I heated up the fire, and I threw them in the flames, but now here they come walking out the door. Oh, most high God, you have saved them, those we killed with pride. Oh, most high God, will you save us, though we try to hide? There's an idol I've built, and it looks just like myself, but I know now that I've done you wrong. So will you tear down what I built? May I look not to myself. Let me praise your name and lift it up in song. Oh, most high God, you have saved us, though we walk through fire. Oh, most high God, will you make it you that we desire? You are here in the fire. You are here in the fire. We are not alone. You are here in the fire. You are here in the fire. We are not alone. Oh, you are here in the fire. You are here in the fire. We are not alone. Oh, you are here in the fire. You are here in the fire. We are not alone. Oh, most high God, you have saved us, though we walk through fire. Oh, most high God, will you make it you that we desire? Oh, most high God, you have saved us, though we walk through fire. Oh, most high God, will you make it you that we desire?
Thanks, Mark. I don't know if Ellie's got the next slide up, but it's if he'd make it full screen for a second. It's just one of my favorite pieces that came out of the Daniel project, and it's this just you can see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fire there, and you can also see that the angel who is protecting them, or Jesus who's protecting them, is in the fire with them. And I believe Tamaki did that, but it's beautiful. So chapters 1 is identity. Chapter 2 and 3 really have a lot to do with dealing with the pride of King Nebuchadnezzar and having Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel rise up into the kingdom as they stay faithful to God, and God protects them and gives them favor. We get to chapter 4 and 5 of Daniel, and chapters 4 and 5 really begin to touch on the theme that has nothing to do with Daniel, and that is the pride of kings and how God faces that pride. And in particular, in chapter 4 and 5 is the pride of Nebuchadnezzar and the pride of his son Belteshazzar. Now, chapter 4 with Nebuchadnezzar is written by Nebuchadnezzar. It's not written by Daniel. This is the cool part of the book of Daniel is that Daniel is in the narrative and Daniel moves along in the narrative, but also you've got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's their chapter, and then you have Nebuchadnezzar, and really you could imagine this as Nebuchadnezzar's testimony, his conversion to God. So it opens up with Nebuchadnezzar having a dream, and the dream's about a big tree, and the tree shelters birds and animals, and then an angel comes down and says the tree has to be chopped down, but leave the roots. And he's very troubled by this dream, and he doesn't have to ask Daniel anymore to tell him the dreams. He can now trust Daniel, and so he tells Daniel the dream, and Daniel doesn't want to tell him the answer. Daniel's troubled by it, and Daniel actually tries to get him to change his ways before what happens in this dream comes to pass. In Daniel chapter 4, verse 24, he offers him the interpretation of the dream. This is the interpretation, Your Majesty, and this is the decree the Most High has issued against my lord the king. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox and be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 times will pass by for you, and you can imagine that 7 years, until you acknowledge the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms of the earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. The command to leave the stump of the tree with its roots means that your kingdom will be restored to you when you acknowledge that heaven rules. And then here comes Daniel's like, please don't let this happen to you. This sounds miserable. Verse 27, therefore, Your Majesty, be pleased to accept my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be that then your prosperity will continue. Nebuchadnezzar is, you can put Nebuchadnezzar in the top 5 most powerful people ever to have lived in the world. And Nebuchadnezzar, it has gone to his head, and God says, I'm going to deal with you. And Daniel's like, please don't let God deal with you, because when God deals with you, it's a severe correction. And for 7 years, you don't want to wander around like a wild animal. And I think Nebuchadnezzar probably tried. But one day, he's up there looking at all the things that he's done, and that's what he says. Look at all the things I've done. Look at how great I am. And in that moment, he becomes a wild animal for 7 years, until he acknowledges that God puts rulers in their place and tears them down, and that heaven rules, not Nebuchadnezzar rules. And then Nebuchadnezzar comes back to sanity and is converted, in a sense. Nebuchadnezzar becomes a follower of God. It seems very clear in chapter 4 that that's what happens. So you see Daniel's holding on to his identity, transforming the identity of the king by simply staying present and staying faithful and praying for understanding. He's there in the right moments to speak truth and help Nebuchadnezzar get to the place he needs to go. That does not mean that just because you decide to follow God at the end of your life after you've gone crazy, that your son, Belteshazzar, is going to do the same. In fact, he's more like a playboy. So once Nebuchadnezzar is dead, we got his son on the throne, and he's throwing wild parties. And during one of these parties, when, I don't know how they're able to read the stuff on the wall, but all of a sudden a hand starts writing on the wall. and they're freaked out because they don't know what it means. And so they're trying to figure out how to interpret it, and they remember that there's this old guy named Daniel who was real helpful to his dad. Maybe we should bring him in. And I just imagine the scene. It's wild party, and good, very honest, very faithful to God, very moral man walks into this party, and he's looking around, and the king is like, you need to tell me what this is. And Daniel does. In Daniel chapter 5, verse 25, it says, this is the inscription that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, parsin. Who knows how you actually say it. Here's what the words mean. Mene, Daniel says, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you've been weighed on the scales and found wanting. And press, which is it's not the plural of parsin. Parsin is the plural of press. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And that day, he's assassinated and killed. And the Medes and the Persians take over Babylon, just like that, boom. The pride and arrogance of kings are overthrown by God. That God is over all. That is, if the sub-narrative, maybe it's the main narrative, but the sub-narrative in a sense, it's not, is that God will be king over all things. And while that's being held, while you and I hold on to that, we're to hold on to our identity in God and pray for understanding, because he's the actual king, not Donald Trump, not Congress, not the mayors, not the governors. They don't rule. Heaven rules, and they only rule under him. And our job is to stay connected to Jesus and to pray for understanding. Now, with that brings one of the most famous stories, Daniel in the lion's den. So we end up with King Darius, who's a Persian, and somehow Daniel is hanging out with him too. And the people who are around King Darius and Daniel don't like Daniel because they don't like Daniel's position. And so they decide to convince the king that people should only pray to the king for like 30 days or something like that, for a period of time. And Darius is like, well, that sounds like a good idea. And you see people of power don't have problems with people saying that they're wonderful. Sure, make a decree that everyone should only pray to me for a certain power. That sounds like great. I would love that. And he's not thinking, and they trick him, because Daniel, there's this theme. Daniel is a man of prayer, and 3 times a day, he points towards Jerusalem and he prays. And they know it, and they catch him, and he gets thrown into the lion's den. Right? And in a sense, God he closes the lions' mouths, but he also changes them into kittens. They just become pleasant, enjoyable animals, I suspect. And Daniel hung out with them all night. And he's delivered, and Darius is so excited that he throws everybody else into the lion's den and commends Daniel. And that ends sort of this historic space and of history of Daniel's life, in the sense of the events that we keep telling our kids, right? And they're events that are important because they're events where God shows up for a man who's willing to pray for understanding. And God goes in front of a man who's willing to stand up for who he is, who God is, and not back down. God steps in for men who are unwilling to bend the knee and worship an idol. And so he ends up in the fire with them. He ends up in the lion's den with them. He ends up facing the kings himself instead of Daniel having to face the kings. Instead of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego face the kings. No, God faces them for them and brings them low and raises Daniel and his friends up. This is the part where the book shifts. And it shifts into a lot of crazy visions about beasts. Weird beasts, goats, all kinds of beasts. And I don't have time to give you all the interpretations of 7 to 12. There are tons of beasts, and some of the interpretations are in Daniel, but a lot of them aren't. But here's the theme that we got out of the Daniel Project that I have held with me for a long time, and that is, we live in a world of terrifying beasts, and they will not leave us alone. Nations as beasts, the decisions that nations make affect us. The decisions that governors make affect us. The decisions that policemen make affect us. The decisions that we internally make that are dark affect us. Beasts represent evil forces that are attempting to devour one another and the people around them. And so they're not going to leave us alone. But in chapters 7 and 8, and there's a nice historic kind of this is what this beast means, this is what this beast means, in the beginning of these visions. But the important part, and by the way, I'm going to flip back, so, if you go back to chapter 7 real quick. Just that picture right there is an angel meeting Daniel and showing him visions. And so that's, I think, done by Rhea. And then, I'm not sure who did this one right here, but it, to me, is the theme of 7 and 8, and really 7 to 12. Because in 7 and 8, we get introduced to somebody who's the Son of Man, and the beasts devour the Son of Man, and then the Son of Man is raised up and into authority and over the beasts. And so really the theme of chapter 7 and 8 is no matter who the beasts are and what the beasts do, God is going to be victorious, and God is going to deliver Daniel and his friends, and God is going to deliver you and I. And that's important, but these visions that Daniel begins to experience are pretty overwhelming to him. And so 7 to 12 are really sort of this almost exhausting experience for Daniel and nearing the end of his life, I suspect. And so we get to chapter 9, and in chapter 9, he begins to pray, and he's confessing. Oh, I guess you need this, huh? Sorry. He's confessing the sins of the people. And because he found in the scroll of Jeremiah that they were supposed to be returned from exile in 70 years. Only it had been 70 years and they were not going home. And an angel shows him that, no, the people have not learned. And so it's going to be a long journey home, and you're only going to do it in trickles, and you're never, ever going to have your homeland back until God establishes it never to be relinquished again. Mark, just you, and Rod wrote a song that kind of deals with Daniel's prayer, and Mark's going to comment on that a little bit.
Yeah. Am I muted still? Man. I turned it on. So Daniel's prayer in chapter 9, Rod and I preached on it. And my sermon centered around how to pray, how we should pray. And so I had this 4-step thing about how we should pray. And it was make your plea. I just had my wife send me a picture, because start with truth, confess, make your plea, and praise God. Start with truth, confess, make your plea, and praise God. And the reason I can look at that and see it is because my wife made little cards with those 4 things on it and set them by our sink. So every time I do the dishes, every time I'm in the kitchen, I can see this little card that reminds me how we should pray and how Daniel's prayer is set up in chapter 9. But then Rod and I, after our sermons in the evening, we were sitting and reflecting on verse 18, which says, "We do not make requests because we're righteous, but because of your great mercy," and how much that connected with us. And so we wrote this song. We really were singing together, and I made a recording of it, and then I put it to music. So, yeah. Yep. So this is Daniel's prayer. Lord, listen, Lord, forgive, Lord, hear and act. Lord, listen, Lord, forgive, Lord, hear and act. We do not make requests because we're righteous, but because of your great mercy. We do not make requests because we're righteous, but because of your great mercy. For your sake, Lord, don't delay, save your city. Look with favor, see your people who bear your name. Hear our prayers and our petitions, Lord, hear our cry. Hear our prayers and our petitions, Lord, hear our cry. We do not make requests because we're righteous, but because of your great mercy. We do not make requests because we're righteous, but because of your great mercy. For your sake, Lord, look with favor upon your sanctuary. Give ear and ear, see our desolation. We bear your name. Lord, listen, Lord, forgive, Lord, hear and now. Lord, listen, Lord, forgive, Lord, hear and now. We do not make requests because we're righteous, but because of your great mercy. We do not make requests because we're righteous, but because of your great mercy. Lord, listen, Lord, forgive, Lord, hear and now. Lord, listen, Lord, forgive, Lord, hear and now. Lord, listen, Lord, forgive, Lord, hear and act. Lord, listen, Lord, forgive, Lord, hear and act.
I really love that song. And there's a line in the very beginning of it that, musically, that reminds me of Whitey Ford Sings the Blues. For those of you who know who that is, you'll know what I'm talking about. But it's wow. It really encapsulates the chapter and Daniel's kind of heartfelt feeling. So I'm going to quickly cover chapter 10 to 12, because what happens after Daniel's prayer is that he's really disturbed that Israel has not confessed and Israel has not changed, and that the consequence of that is that they're not going to go back. But on top of that, he has all of these visions of kingdoms that are going to come and what they're going to do. And so he decides at the beginning of chapter 10 to actually fast and mourn all of this and seek understanding, which is the theme of Daniel. Anytime he doesn't understand something or needs understanding, he begins to pray. And this time he really ends up just not eating and mourning so much that he becomes weak. But what's interesting about chapter 10 to 12 is it's a picture, it's an apocalyptic picture, in that it has Daniel acting, and then what we're allowed to see is the veil being kind of torn back a little bit, and we get to see what's happening in the spiritual world. And so as Daniel seeks understanding, he does not receive answers. And what he finds out is it's because there is a battle between angels. And the messenger who's supposed to come to Daniel and give him understanding cannot get there because he had to contend with evil, basically, and darkness. And there's this idea that's revealed that behind every kingdom, there are angels, ones that defend and ones that are dark and evil. And there's a battle going on. And I think this is the third thing that we have to understand out of Daniel is that Daniel not only is, as he holds on to his identity and as he seeks understanding in prayer, what we find out is that he enters into a cosmic battle. And so his prayer is a force not only in the visible world but in the unseen world. And the reality of that is that as you and I wrestle with what is happening around us, I think Daniel points us back to what we are fasting from yesterday, and where Hezekiah is at the end of his rope, where King Sennacherib in 2 Kings 19 is about to destroy Jerusalem before Babylon, so Assyria is coming, and he tells God, open your ear, lend your ear, open your eyes, hear what King Sennacherib is doing. Like, you need to do something. Part of us seeking understanding, part of us praying is asking God to intervene, asking God to inform us, asking God to help us. And in doing that, we are entering a battle that we cannot see. And I think Daniel invites us into that. And in all of that, Daniel, in the end, is given a vision of the end. And so when you get to chapter 12 of Daniel, nobody knows what it means except for one thing, that in the end, God brings peace. And I want to read just to close it out, because Daniel is still trying to figure out what it all means. He doesn't understand what it completely means. People for now are still trying to figure out what it means. Everybody has different ideas. But I want to read it to you, and what I want you to hear is not that this is what's going to happen to the future. I want you to hear this is what's going to happen to you, Daniel. Because I think in the end, I love it. The book starts out in chapter 1 with Daniel being taken into captivity, complete uncertainty, having to hold on to his identity as a God follower and get on his knees and pray for deliverance. And at the end of Daniel, in the midst of all of this sort of apocalyptic visions, there's a message to Daniel. And I just want you to hear that, because I think it's the message to you and me. So I'm going to reread this chapter and we'll close. At that time, Michael, the great prince who protected your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress such as not happened from the beginning of the nation until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found in the book, will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life and others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of heaven, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, roll up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there before me stood two others, one on this bank of the river and the other on the opposite bank. One of them said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, how long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled? The man clothed in linen, who was above the water of the river, lifted his right hand and his left hand towards heaven, and I heard him swear by him who lives forever, saying, it will be for a time, times and a half and a time. When the power of the holy people has been finally broken, all these things will be accomplished. I heard, but I did not understand, so I asked my Lord, what will the outcome of all this be? He replied, go your way, Daniel, because the words are rolled up in the seal and sealed until the time of the end. Many will be purified, made spotless and refined, but the wicked will continue to be wicked. None of the wicked will understand, but those who are wise will understand. From the time of the daily sacrifice to the abolished and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Blessed is the one who waits and reaches for the end of 1,335 days. As for you, go on your way till the end. You will rest. And then at the end of the days, you will rise and receive your allotted inheritance. I love that in all of the chaos that Daniel has experienced, he doesn't actually gain any understanding. There's a little understanding. What he gains is God saying, it's okay, Daniel. Take a deep breath. These are not things for you. Roll up the scroll. When you die, you'll be resurrected, and you will receive your inheritance. It's beautiful. It's peaceful. It's good job, Daniel. You have followed me. I love you. It's okay. You don't have to worry about all of this. I think that's a powerful message that Daniel offers us as we look at all the chaotic things of our world and say, I don't know, or I think, or we feel great anxiety about so much. And it all seems very confusing. That last line, you could put your name in it. As for you, Eric, go your way till the end. You will rest. And then at the end of days, you will rise and receive your allotted inheritance. Put your name in there, because that's the message of Daniel to you. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the way that you teased out Daniel for us a year and a half ago. From us reading it to the songs that have defined our community and spoken so deeply to us out of chapter 9 and chapter 3. Thank you. I knew it was 3. Thank you, because they've taught us so much about who you are and the art and just the beauty of expression that you've invited us into as we wrestle with Daniel and his exile and what it means to us and how we should live and how we should relate to you. I thank you for that opportunity and for the blessing it is to us right now in this moment. Amen.